Okay.
You want to take another call or keep on with...
Let me go ahead and wrap this up here, and
Okay.
we'll just take some calls here.
Gotcha.
So let's talk a little bit about Proposition 8 as a moral panic. We've made some allusions to this, and part of it is it played on people's fears that the status of their marriage would somehow be diminished if gay people were allowed to marry. And in the process of doing this, they, just like typical rule creators, the moral crusaders, they trampled on the truth. They made some demonstrably false claims, one of which was that churches will lose their tax-exempt status if they don't perform gay weddings, which of course is absolutely false. For example, if someone suggests this to you, you can ask them, if an interracial couple walked into, say, a Baptist church or whatever and said, we want to get married, and the pastor, for whatever reason, declined to marry them, would they have any legal recourse on that? And the answer is absolutely not. A church can...
Get married somewhere else.
Yeah, they can get married somewhere else.
I mean,
they still
I don't
have
have a
access to
problem
civil
with-
marriage.
Yeah.
And that was the whole issue.
Oh, yeah, okay, I got you.
You know, that it had nothing to do with forcing a church to do something that violated their particular doctrine. And, you know, again, if you walk into a church and the pastor refuses to perform the wedding ceremony for any reason at all, you have no legal recourse. You just go to another church. No one can force a church to do something that's against their doctrine. And the second thing is that children are going to be taught about gay marriage in kindergarten. And, of course, that overlooks the fact that if your children go to a school somewhere, anywhere, they're likely to run into the children of gay or lesbian parents. And in that case, they're going to know that some people have a mommy and a daddy, and some people have two daddies, and some people have two mommies. And you're going to have to figure out how you deal with that. Mm-hmm. The kids are going to be fine. If nobody makes a big deal out of that, they're not going to make a big deal out of it either.
Right. And of course, according to that theory, that we shouldn't allow gay marriage on the grounds that we'd have to teach our children about it, there are all kinds of things that adults can indulge in that children shouldn't, that we wouldn't want our kids learning about.
And, you know, in terms of...
I mean, I guess under that theory, we ought to outlaw war.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't allow explicit violence for children, so...
and, you know, I think this is particularly ridiculous considering the fact that a lot of the people that are, well, I mean, I'll just flat out say this. There's no secular argument against gay marriage or adoption or fostering of children by gay people. There are no secular arguments against that.
I have heard people attempt to make secular arguments against gay marriage. The only ones I've heard really attempt to say that there should be no marriage at all, which doesn't really count.
Yeah.
And then there's also sort of a pretty lame attempt at an evolution argument, like, oh.
Yeah. Because underpopulation is a real problem in the world today. You know?
There aren't enough. There aren't enough babies being born.
Yes.
And last week, Tracy, I just have to repeat this because it was so awesome.
Yeah.
She said on the show, "Well, if everybody was female, then the population would die out. That doesn't mean that being female is immoral."
Right. Yes. I was actually in the studio audience last week, so I thought her reply was particularly good.
I just listened to that on the way over here, and it was great.
Yeah. And so there's this idea that the kids are going to be somehow harmed by this as well, and that's coming up often. A lot of the even atheists that write to us say, okay, I don't really have a problem with gay people getting married, but if there's kids involved, hey, there's a third party involved in this. So wake up and smell the coffee, people. Anytime you bring a child into a relationship, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual, if a child is involved, there's a third party, the kid. So you have to figure out how you're going to raise the kid. And the mechanisms for doing that are pretty much the same, whether one parent is male and the other female, or whether they're both the same sex. Okay? The Arkansas adoption bill is also an example of a moral argument or a moral panic because this was based on Paul Cameron's research that says that gay men in particular are more likely to molest children, and their families are unstable, and they're more likely to use recreational drugs or stay out partying and stuff like that. Again, his research methods are pretty shoddy, but this was used, they first attempted to do this in 2006. That ban on gay adoption in Arkansas was struck down as unconstitutional. So they drafted the current bill. It was drafted by an organization called the Arkansas Family Council. It was supported by Focus on the Family. And it affects all unmarried couples now. So it doesn't matter if you're gay or straight. If you're an unmarried couple cohabiting, you cannot foster or adopt children in Arkansas. Now, these people have made the outrageous claim that they are actually promoting adoption, and that this is going to result in more families being available to adopt children in Arkansas, because now heterosexual married couples are going to step up to the plate and do this. And so my question to them is, why weren't they stepping up to the plate in the first place? So I've talked a lot about Paul Cameron, so I want to get into who this guy is. He actually started out his career, he's an academic, he's got a PhD. He was at the University of Nebraska for a while. He was conducting research on a lot of things, one of which was homosexuality. And so at some point he got aligned with some very conservative individuals and started doing research into origins of homosexuality, and in particular things like the lifespan of the average homosexual. And he ended up being kicked out of the American Psychological Association because he misrepresented some research by other researchers, so he was not necessarily all that honest. He was also criticized by the American Sociological Association, again, for mischaracterizing other people's research. The Canadian Psychological Association published a statement distancing itself from him. And so basically, every major social science organization has published something repudiating Paul Cameron's ideas. And to give you an example of how sloppy his research methods were, when he was doing a study on longevity of gay men, for example, he used the obituaries in gay newspapers as the source of his material. So totally skewed sample there, and that's just an example of one of the things. Now,
and to suss out why it's probably a skewed sample, the average person who's likely to be either reading or mentioned in a gay magazine, like any activist magazine, probably skews younger to begin with. That's not a scientific survey of people who die and are gay. You'd have to actually do some work other than just, I mean, you know, this is a pet peeve of mine as somebody who was really into data mining in grad school.
Yeah.
You have to actually do some work to make sure that you have unbiased samples of everyone who dies and is gay.
Yes.
And I don't know how you do that, but that's not it.
Yeah. So anyway, in his quest to demonstrate that the gay lifestyle, as he put it, was somehow, you know, would cause you to die young or whatever, he formed this Institute for the Scientific Investigation of Sexuality in Lincoln, Nebraska. This thing later became the Family Research Institute, so you guys are probably familiar with that name.
You gotta love how they always have to tack the word science onto it in some capacity, because they know science has some credibility in its own right, and so they figure they can piggyback on that.
Yes.
That's what cargo cult science is all about.
Absolutely. So anyway, he's the guy whose research is most often cited by opponents of either gay marriage or gay parenting. And to give you an example of someone who most recently used some of Paul Cameron's research, there was a recent case in Florida, because as some of you may know, Florida has a ban on gay people adopting children. You can be foster parents. You can foster children that no one else wants, people that need the best parenting out there. And in fact, a lot of gay couples had taken on the HIV positive infants and other, you know, the crack babies and other babies that just, you know, nobody else wanted to take on a kid that had special needs. And so gay parents would take these kids on. And in some cases, once the kids were a little older and it became obvious that they weren't going to suffer the serious side effects of, for example, their prenatal environment, then they became adoptable. And a lot of these kids were taken from the only home they had ever known and placed up for adoption by heterosexual married couples. Earlier this year, a gay couple in Florida who had been caring for two half-brothers for the last 4 years filed for adoption of these two boys. And all of the social workers agreed that the children were thriving in their homes. However, this was opposed by the state because of the ban on gay adoption. So they challenged it in court. One of the experts that was called by the state of Florida was a guy who, he's retired now, but he cited Paul Cameron's research as part of his opposition, claiming that gays are more likely to be, drug abusers, they're more likely to stay out late, be neglectful parents, whatever. And so on cross-examination, he admitted that he also wouldn't favor placing children in the homes of, for example, Native Americans because, there's a high percentage of alcoholism among Native Americans, and Native Americans tend to hang around each other, therefore, the kids would be exposed to this.
Perfect.
Yeah. So this is the kind of guy we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, let's go ahead and take some calls here.
Okay.
So we got